Wait, you celebrate Easter? You've got to be kidding me. You know that's a pagan holiday, right? You know the Bible says don't have any other gods before me. How dare you worship other gods on Easter? You do the Easter bunny? You do eggs? Are you kidding me? Hold up. Wait a minute. Let's correct the record. Every year, it seems like there are people who claim that Easter is pagan, and we get to Christmas, and Christmas is pagan, and we get to all of these holidays, and there are arguments that they derive from pagan gods and pagan rituals. I'm going to address today, is Easter pagan? We're going to look at the evidence. We're going to actually talk about it and see, did Easter derive from a pagan holiday? And are we all going to hell because we worship the god of Ishtar or some other foreign god? All right, let's just get right into this. People claim that the holiday of Easter is a pagan holiday that in the Bible that we celebrated Passover, and now it's all about Easter, and Easter came from different traditions, say different things, from pagan holidays to appease the pagans or to blend in paganism with Christianity, and all of these other comments and claims. We're going to look at some of these claims today and see if it's actually true and see if it holds up. And we're going to start off right with the concept of the name Easter. So people claim that the name Easter derives from pagan goddesses and gods, and it all comes back to fertility gods and all these other things. There are people who claim that the name Easter derives from the pagan goddess Ishtar or Estra, which are two different goddesses, but people claim both, that it derives from one or the other.
Is that true?
That's what I heard.
And this is simply not true. The truth is, Easter is actually only called Easter and has that name that sounds similar to those names in Germanic languages, basically Anglo-Saxon or English-speaking countries. In most places in the world, the holiday actually has the name Pascha, which actually derives from the word Passover. So Passover is, we know, a biblical feast, not pagan at all. It is the Passover feast that is associated with the death of Jesus. And so Easter, which we use in English, it is actually called Pascha in most places across the globe. So in Greek, it's called Pascha. In Italian, it's Pasqua. In Danish, it is Påske. In French, it is Pâques. And all of these words derive from Passover. So if we are going to argue that it's a pagan holiday and everything's pagan because of the name, then you have to acknowledge that this same exact holiday is actually derived from Passover in these other places, and it's the same holiday we have in America, even though we have a different word for it. So unless you're saying that these holidays in these other countries derived from Passover are pagan, you can't really base it on the name. This is actually a fallacy, saying that because this word and this word sound similar in some ways, it must mean that these are the same, that they derived from each other. And that's simply not true. This is like saying the word ate, A-T-E, and the word eight, E-I-G-H-T, are the same because they sound alike, so they're connected. Even though one of them's about eating food and the other one's a number, and they're not connected in any way, not even in their root or where they came from. It's a fallacy. It doesn't actually work. And it's very dangerous to actually do this because this same logic is applied to the Bible by people who want to discredit the Bible. For example, the book Esther. Esther, people claim, is a copy of an old Babylonian account of Ishtar, Esther, and Marduk, Mordecai. And they use these names and say they sound similar, and you can pull out some similarities in the stories. So they must be exact copies, and it must not have been real, and therefore the book of Esther isn't actually the word of God. And that is dangerous.
And dumb.
You do not build beliefs and assertions on these type of fallacies. It leads to all kinds of error, and it's a double-edged sword that can come back and bite you. So let me deal with the two primary goddesses that people try to link Easter to in the name. The first one is Ishtar. This one's one that you can find online. Some people claim that the name Easter was derived from Ishtar. It's simply not true. There's no connection, no actual evidence of that at all. It's a theory that people throw around, and it's based solely on the names. There's no actual scholarship, no historical evidence, no anything that links Easter and Ishtar. People try to claim, well, Ishtar was all about rabbits and eggs and all of this stuff. That's simply not true either. There's no proof that Ishtar, which was a Babylonian god and is featured in the Epic of Gilgamesh, was ever associated with eggs or rabbits. As a matter of fact, the closest we have to Ishtar being associated with an animal would be a lion. Ishtar's sacred animals seem to be a lion. You'll even hear some people claim that the name Ishtar was actually pronounced Easter. There's no evidence to support that claim either. There's just no evidence to support it. It's just an online theory someone made up, and there's nothing, no evidence, historically, archaeological, none of it, to back up the claim that Ishtar has anything to do with Easter, that the name derived from Ishtar, or that Ishtar had anything to do with rabbits, eggs, any of that. The more common claim is that it was derived from Istra. Istra is a goddess that is claimed to have been worshipped around the time of Passover. But here's the problem with this goddess. First of all, there is no actual evidence that we can find other than one source, and I'll talk about it in a moment, that this goddess was actually even a real goddess or ever worshipped. There is only one mention of this goddess ever existing that we have record of, and that was written by Saint Bede, who lived in the late 600 and early 700 AD. There's no other reference at all to this goddess. We have no altars or temples or any other historical records, no written records, no artifacts, no nothing to this goddess. This has led most scholars to think that Bede either made up out of the blue this goddess.
It's clearly a name he just made up.
Or more likely had some other goddess in mind and just got the name wrong. So it doesn't work to say that we took all this worship of Estra and made it into Easter in order to appease this religion that we don't even know actually even existed. There is no 100% certainty on where the name Easter actually ended up deriving from, but the most likely explanation is that it was derived from the name of the month. In Old English, the fourth month on the calendar was Eastermanath. This holiday, where we celebrated the resurrection of Jesus, occurred at that time, around that month on the calendar. People recognized that it was on that calendar, and over time, it became associated with the name of that month and got shortened down to Easter. That is the most likely place, and this isn't without precedent. We do this with Independence Day. How many times have you heard Independence Day called July 4th? We celebrate Independence Day on July 4th, and now the 4th of July has become known as one of the names of the holiday, even though the holiday is actually Independence Day. And over time, it just has become part of our language that, hey, are you going to celebrate the 4th of July? Meaning Independence Day. It's part of the name of the holiday. This happens with language over time. So that deals with the name of Easter. The name of Easter does not derive from pagans, from some kind of pagan goddess or pagan celebration. It was always and has always been a resurrection of Jesus celebration, and the name just derived from the name of the month. Now, is it possible the name of the month in Old English derived from some pagan god? Yeah, it's possible. But that doesn't mean that the holiday itself that took on the name of the month was derived from the pagan goddess. So what about the actual symbols, the things that we associate with Easter? Now, we know that Easter is all about celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. It always has been from the beginning for the church. But going further, we add things to that celebration, things like eggs, dying Easter eggs, or things like the Easter bunny. So let's talk about those things. Do those derive from pagan rituals? So people claim that the Easter bunny is a pagan fertility symbol, and that we use it in Easter because we're worshiping the fertility gods, and since rabbits tend to mate quite often, it is considered a fertility symbol. Well, let's look at the evidence. The first reference we have to the Easter bunny happened in 1572. This is long after paganism had died out. Paganism had died out around 1050. So this is about 500 years later, or just over 500 years later, that the first mention of the Easter bunny happens. So first of all, right off the bat, it should cast doubt on the idea that people 500 years after pagan rituals were done started borrowing from pagan rituals. That just doesn't compute. Now, is it possible that the Easter bunny tradition goes back further before 1572? Yeah, it's possible, but we just have no evidence to support that claim. The earliest evidence we have goes to 1572, and that's it. And we have a lot of record of this holiday and the celebration of the resurrection well before that. So the fact that we don't have any record of an Easter bunny being mentioned, pretty slim that it was something before 1572. And originally, it wasn't the Easter bunny, it was the Easter hare. A hare and a rabbit are not actually the same thing. A hare is not actually associated with fertility like a rabbit is. Hares don't mate at the same rate that rabbits do. Hares aren't generally seen together in little groups, thinking of like, a bunch of children. Hares tend to actually be seen alone. So it doesn't appear the Easter Bunny actually was tied to fertility or any type of pagan fertility ritual, because they would have used the rabbit rather than the hare. The first reference we have to the Easter Bunny being considered pagan came from Jacob Grimm in the 19th century. And he actually had no evidence to assert that the Easter Bunny was associated with paganism. He only suggested that it could be the case in his writings. But when he suggested that it could be the case, that rumor spread when he never actually asserted that it was pagan. The reason, more than likely, the hare became associated with Easter is because that hares hibernate in winter, and all of a sudden you see them in the spring, right around the time of Easter. So 16th century Germans who were just coming up with ways to celebrate and new ways to celebrate, all of a sudden they see right around the time of Easter this picture of hibernation. These hares are hibernating, and then all of a sudden they come out of the ground and they're all over the place at the time of Easter, which is a picture of resurrection, right? Going under the ground and hibernating and resurrecting, or coming out of hibernation, coming out of the ground at the time of Easter. So it's more than likely this natural spring phenomenon of the hare coming out of hibernation at the time of Easter and all of a sudden seeing them around. 16th century Germans decided, hey, let's associate this with Easter and bring it in as part of our celebration of the resurrection. And it had nothing to do with paganism. What about Easter eggs? Easter eggs have no direct trace to paganism either. Yes, eggs have been used in pagan rituals, but only for the same reason that meat and crops have been used in pagan rituals as well. They're a commonly eaten food. So it's not that eggs in and of themselves are pagan or tied to pagan any more than beef has been used in pagan rituals. Does that mean we can't eat steak? And if you eat a steak, you're involved in paganism? Of course not, right? So eggs in and of themselves are used in pagan rituals, but not in any other way than meat or crops are. The origins of Easter eggs is not known 100%, but I can tell you when we have the first reference to it, and that is in 1290. King Edward I had 450 hard-boiled eggs decorated with golden leaves and given to his family members on Easter. Now, there's some evidence that at the exact same time that he was doing this, there were also eggs being used in the celebration of Easter in Poland and Germany as well. So it's unlikely that King Edward was the first person to come up with the idea of the Easter egg. While we don't know 100% for sure before that what started with the Easter eggs, there is no direct tie to paganism, and the most likely explanation that we can find has to do with Lent. During the days of Lent in medieval times, people would refrain from meat, dairy, and eggs for the full 40 days of Lent. Towards the end of Lent, peasants would go out and collect eggs from the chickens and hard boil them so they could preserve them for the end of Lent. Dairy and meat at that time were very expensive, and they were most often reserved for the lords and the rich. So what most people would do after the end of Lent, rather than engaging in dairy and meat, which were expensive, most people who were not rich would end up celebrating by eating eggs because they were readily available even to the poor, and so they would eat eggs on Easter. And over time, as people celebrated, they gathered all these eggs and it became a festive thing to have eggs for Easter. Over time, the traditions to hide them and the traditions to paint them and things like that just came over time as a part of celebration because it's a festive time and you're looking for festive activities to do with your family. And again, eggs were readily available. There doesn't seem to be any pagan connection to the Easter eggs. So what's the point of what I am saying? What's the point of all this? Celebrating Easter is not pagan. The name itself doesn't derive from paganism. The Easter Bunny and Easter eggs don't derive from paganism. There's nothing wrong with doing an Easter egg hunt with your kids. There's nothing wrong with talking about the Easter Bunny. Now, it's completely separate on whether or not you tell your children that the Easter Bunny is a real person or a real thing that comes into your home, and that's a different discussion than just saying that the Easter Bunny in and of itself is pagan. There is no pagan traditions related to any of this that we have any record of. Easter is not a pagan holiday. It is a celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. Now, I will say on a separate note from that, I fully think that the church should embrace the symbolism of Passover and what happened at Passover with Jesus as the Passover lamb leading into the celebration of Easter as the day of resurrection, which would have been the day of first fruits in the Bible. I think getting back to some of these biblical concepts and looking at them, not that you're required to by law to follow the Old Testament feasts, but the symbolism in them and understanding them, very important to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. But there is nothing wrong with celebrating Easter. Easter is a perfectly fine holiday that is celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, and you don't have to worry about it being pagan. And as a last and final note on this, I'm just going to say that even if there were pagan origins to some of these things, that wouldn't make you pagan for celebrating today. What made the pagan rituals pagan was the fact that they were celebrating pagan gods. So if you're doing something that isn't inherently sinful, like painting an Easter egg, taking an egg and painting an egg is not sinful. There's no scripture in the Bible that says thou shalt not paint eggs. Rabbits in and of themselves are not sinful. These things are not sinful. So if there's nothing sinful about it and you're not worshiping a pagan god, then it isn't pagan to engage in those activities, because you're doing those things which are not sinful ultimately to worship Jesus and to celebrate his resurrection. So it's not pagan, even if you could tie it back to pagan traditions. However, there is no such tie. I hope this helped you. Hope you feel free in your freedom to celebrate Easter. I hope everyone has a wonderful Easter week and Easter weekend this upcoming weekend at the time I'm recording this. If you're finding value in these videos and in the videos I release, I highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell. Down below, I have some affiliate links for Amazon, including the Amazon homepage. If you go to that link and purchase something off Amazon, it helps the channel. There's also a link to give to the channel. And when we get to 500 subscribers, I'm going to be giving away a chronological Bible. It goes day by day through the entire Bible with day-by-day readings to get you through the Bible an entire year in a chronological fashion, which changed the way I read the Bible. Highly encourage you to read the Bible in a chronological fashion. So I'm going to be giving that away once I hit 500 subscribers. So I hope you subscribe, share this, and get other people to subscribe, and maybe you'll be the one that wins the Bible. Until next time. And if you're interested in more information about the resurrection of Jesus, I have a video right here that actually gives evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Check it out.